Somewhere in the hills of southeastern Minnesota, a river runs off the edge of the world. The south branch of the Root River comes down through farm country, reaches a certain bend, and simply vanishes into a hole in the ground. It does not pool and it does not slow. It pours into the dark and keeps going, through more than 13 miles of stone corridors that no one on the surface can see. We are about to follow it in. This is Mystery Cave in Fillmore County, in the far southeastern corner of Minnesota, between the small towns of Spring Valley and Preston. It is the longer, stranger half of a place called Forestville Mystery Cave State Park. Up on the surface, the land looks ordinary enough: rolling green hills, corn, pasture, and quiet county roads. But this corner of the state hides something the rest of Minnesota does not have. Beneath these fields lies the longest cave in the state. The way in is gentler than you expect. A paved path leads down through a doorway in the hillside, and the daylight thins behind you with every step. The air changes first. It goes still, and damp, and cool, the way a cellar feels on a hot afternoon, and then cooler than any cellar you have ever stood in. By the time the passage levels out, the world above has been sealed off completely. To understand the cave, you have to start with that vanishing river. Across this whole region, surface water refuses to stay on the surface. Streams run along, cut down into the limestone, find a crack, and disappear underground, leaving their old beds dry. The south branch of the Root River does exactly this, sinking into the rock at one point and rising again somewhere else downstream. The cave is simply the plumbing that carries it between those two places. Down here, the first thing your body notices is the temperature. It never changes. Whatever the season is on the surface, whether it is January or the middle of July, the air inside Mystery Cave holds steady. The rock is too deep and too massive to feel the sun or the frost, so it settles at one number and stays there, year after year, century after century. That number is 48 degrees Fahrenheit. It is roughly 9 degrees on the Celsius scale, and it is the same in the dead of winter as it is in the heat of August. 48 degrees is the average yearly temperature of the ground itself in this part of Minnesota, and the cave simply keeps it. Step inside on a summer day, and you feel it as a cold you were not dressed for. Step inside in winter, and the same air feels almost warm. Reach out and the walls tell you what you are standing inside of. This is limestone, layer stacked on layer, pale gray and faintly banded, laid down flat as a floor. In places, a harder, tougher rock called dolomite runs through it. None of it formed here, in the dark, in a cave. Every inch of this stone was made somewhere else entirely, a very long time ago at the bottom of a sea. Roughly 450 million years ago, in a chapter of deep time that geologists call the Ordovician, this whole region lay drowned beneath a shallow tropical sea. Warm salt water covered the middle of the continent. Lime mud and the crushed shells of countless small creatures settled onto the seabed and slowly hardened into rock. That rock is the limestone around us now. The cave is carved into the floor of a vanished ocean, lifted up and left behind when the sea withdrew. And the sea left proof. Look closely at the faces of the passage, and the stone is not blank. It is crowded with fossils, the shells and stems and scattered pieces of animals that lived and died in that Ordovician ocean. They are pressed into the walls like type into a page. Each one is older than the first fish, older than the first tree, older than nearly everything we normally call ancient. These were the creatures of a world with no life yet on land. Corals and sponges built reefs in the warm water. Trilobites crawled the muddy floor, and snails and clams and the coiled shells of early squid drifted and settled. When they died, their hard parts sank into the lime mud and were buried. 450 million years later, a paved path runs past them a few feet underground. The passages do not run straight. They branch and rejoin and double back, following the old cracks in the rock where water first found a way through. In two different rock layers, one above the other, the corridors wind for more than 13 miles in total. Only a fraction of that is open to visitors on a lit and paved route. The rest reaches off into darkness, mapped by surveyors but left to the water and the dark. A landscape that behaves this way has a name. Geologists call it Karst, and it forms wherever rock like limestone can be slowly dissolved by water. On the surface, Karst country is full of clues. Round sinkholes open in fields where the ground has quietly collapsed. Streams vanish down swallow holes and springs burst out of hillsides, and almost none of the water travels the way you would guess from a map. This corner of Minnesota is special for another reason too. It sits on the edge of a region called the Driftless Area, a rugged pocket of the upper Midwest that the last great glaciers somehow missed. While ice sheets flattened and smoothed most of the state, this country was spared, keeping its deep valleys and its steep wooded bluffs. Without a blanket of glacial debris sealing the surface, water could work straight down into the limestone. That is one reason the caves and sinkholes are here, and not somewhere else. So how does solid rock become a hollow this size? The answer is patient beyond imagining, and it is happening around you right now. Listen and you can hear it. The slow drip and trickle of water finding its way through stone. Every drop that falls on the surface picks up a faint trace of acid from the air and the soil. Alone, one drop does nothing. Together, over a span of time we can barely hold in our heads, they hollowed out these miles of passage. Chemistry is simple and relentless. Rainwater soaks through the soil and turns very slightly acidic, and that weak acid can dissolve limestone the way warm water dissolves sugar, only far more slowly. Where the water finds a crack in the rock, it widens it grain by grain into a seam, then a tube, then a corridor a person can walk through. Geologists believe Mystery Cave was carved within the last several 100,000 years. By the scale of the rock itself, that makes the cave astonishingly young. But water does not only take stone away, it also brings stone back, and here is where the cave turns from a plumbing system into something worth the trip. Overhead, the ceiling has grown teeth. Thin stone spikes hang down out of the dark, some no bigger than a straw, some as thick as an arm. Each one was built drop by drop, and each one is still growing, so slowly that a human lifetime barely adds a hair's width. These are stalactites, and they form when mineral-rich water clings to the ceiling and leaves behind a tiny ring of stone before it falls. Where those drips land on the floor below, the mineral piles up instead of hanging, building a blunt column that reaches upward. Those are stalagmites. Given enough time, a stalactite and a stalagmite can meet in the middle and join into a single pillar of stone. The whole slow architecture is written in water and lime. Not every formation drips. Where water runs in a thin sheet down a wall or across a slope, it leaves its mineral behind as it flows, and the deposit spreads out in smooth, stony curtains and frozen cascades. This is called flowstone, and in parts of the cave it drapes the rock like candle wax or poured cream. It can glow amber and honey and rust brown, colored by iron and other minerals in the water. It looks liquid, caught in the act of pouring, though it has not moved in ages. Then the path comes alongside water, and the cave goes completely silent. Pools lie in the low places of the floor, fed by the ground water that is still, at this moment, dissolving the cave deeper. Their surfaces are perfectly flat, without a breath of wind to disturb them. In the still air, they hold so motionless that they turn into mirrors, and the boundary between rock and reflection almost disappears. These underground pools are one of the strangest sights in the cave. Lit softly, a still pool doubles the ceiling above it, so the stone formations seem to plunge downward into a second cave hanging beneath your feet. The water is clear and cold and astonishingly quiet. It is the same water that carved the passages and grew the formations, seen at rest, doing its patient work out of sight. Standing beside it, you are looking straight at the thing that made the room. The tour follows only a chosen thread through the maze. Above and below the lit route, dark passages run in two separate levels of rock, stacked like the floors of a building. Surveyors have crawled and waded and mapped their way through those miles, sketching a labyrinth most visitors will never see. What the paved path shows is a careful sample, arranged so that anyone can walk it. The real cave is far larger than the part with the lights on. For all its age, the cave was unknown to the wider world until surprisingly recently. On the 3rd of February 1937, A local man named Joe Petty noticed something odd along the south branch of the Root River. In the winter cold, faint warmth was rising from an opening in the ground, the cave breathing out its steady 48-degree air into the freezing day. He followed it and found the entrance. That small, warm breath in the snow is how Minnesota's longest cave was discovered. For years after that, the cave was run privately, shown to paying visitors who came to see the underground. Owners strung lights, laid walkways, and gave the formations names, the way early cave operators did all across the country. People drove long distances to descend into the cool and the dark. It was a roadside wonder, a piece of hidden Minnesota that word of mouth kept alive. But its long-term protection was still uncertain. The cave is not empty of life. In the cold months, bats come here to hibernate, hanging in the still, even air where the temperature never drops below freezing. A cave like this is exactly what they need to survive a Minnesota winter, a shelter that holds its warmth while the world outside turns lethal. For thousands of years, these caves have been their refuge, and in the last 2 decades, that refuge has become a front line. The threat is a disease called white nose syndrome, caused by a cold-loving fungus that grows on hibernating bats. It rouses them in the depth of winter, burning the fat they need to survive until spring, and it has been catastrophic. Across North America, more than 5.7 million bats have died from it. The fungus has been detected here, in the caves of southeastern Minnesota. It is why visitors are asked to keep from carrying the spores in and out on their clothes and their shoes. Which raises a question that hangs over a place like this. Who looks after a cave? For most of its known life, Mystery Cave was private property, a business, dependent on ticket sales and the goodwill of whoever owned the land above. A thing this old and this fragile needs more certainty than that. The answer, when it came, arrived from an unlikely direction, out of a ghost town a few miles away. That ghost town is Forestville, the other half of the park's name. In the 1800s, it was a busy country village of stores and mills and homes, until the railroad passed it by and the life drained out of it. Its last owner, a man named Thomas Mahan, kept the old building standing. In 1963, the state protected the town site, and Forestville State Park was born, guarding a 19th-century village frozen in time. But the cave, a few miles off, was still on its own. The two halves came together late. For 25 years, the historic village was a state park, while the great cave nearby stayed in private hands, famous but unguarded. It was an odd arrangement, a protected ghost town and an unprotected wonder, sharing the same quiet corner of Fillmore County. Everyone could see they belonged together. It took until nearly the end of the 1980s for that to finally happen. In 1988, the state of Minnesota purchased Mystery Cave and folded it into the park. The name was changed to Forestville Mystery Cave State Park, joining the village and the cave under a single protection at last. The Department of Natural Resources took over the tour, added modern lighting and accessible walkways, and began to manage the cave not as an attraction to sell, but as a resource to keep. The transformation from roadside show to protected wonder was complete. After half a century in private hands, Minnesota's longest cave belonged to the public. Protection changes how a place like this is treated. A cave is not a renewable thing. The formations you pass grew across tens of thousands of years, and a single careless touch leaves an oil stain that can stop a stalactite growing for good. So the paths keep you to a chosen line, the lights are placed with care, and the pools and the bats and the fragile stone are left as much as possible to themselves. You are a guest in a room that took an age to build. It is easy to forget, walking the quiet fields of Fillmore County, that any of this is here. The whole hidden world lies just beneath the corn and the pasture, a river running through the dark, a maze in the stone, mirrors of still water and stone grown drop by drop into shapes no hand could carve. It has been forming since before there were people to wonder at it. And it will go on forming, silently, long after the last visitor of the day has climbed back out. The surface keeps its secret well. Then the path turns upward, and far ahead a pale gray light appears where the passage meets the door. The cool, even air begins to give way to the warmth and the noise of the surface world. Behind you, the cave closes back into its perfect dark, 48 degrees, patient, and entirely indifferent to the fact that you were ever there. You step out blinking into the ordinary hills, and the river runs on underground beneath your feet. Thank you for watching. Follow for more of the trails of the world.